just wanted to make that clear, because I think that is an issue arising out of that executive paper and going to council. I think that's a matter to be discussed at full council rather than at this meeting.
Okay. Yes, I was aware of what you've just said, only because I asked the question as well, and because I felt that the executive minutes were not sufficiently clear. So to answer Mr. Molyneux's question, I'm not going to ask questions about the deferment, which is for the 31st of March, but I would like to ask other questions of Fusion. Does that help?
That's fine. Yeah. Right. Yeah, please.
Okay, right, thank you. Right, I'm looking at the report, and I'm looking at 2.2, which talks about increasing active participation in sport and leisure activities. That's on page 11. And I guess that really means that that's an increase in participation across the whole of South Hams. I have expressed comments in the past about Fusion not servicing the more rural areas, admittedly, including my ward, but not exclusively. And much of their activity is in and around the main centres within Tottenham, Cider Bridge and so on. So can I ask of Fusion, or John, or whoever, under 2.2, what has been done or is proposed to be done to fulfil that statement the further away from these leisure centres that you get, if that makes sense? Because I really don't feel, I mean, I've been in my role for 3 years, and I still can't find anyone in my ward who actually uses these facilities. And I would have thought I might have come across at least one by now. So that was the first question.
Shall we take one question at a time? Yes. So, Councillor Hawkins, can you answer the question? You're muted.
I apologise. I'm going to ask Chris Book to come back and clarify the situation. But so I understand it, Fusion are contracted to do all they possibly can to increase the usage of the leisure centres in our surrounding communities, and they're not actually contracted to develop work in our communities. Now, we're hoping very much in the weeks, months ahead that we can come forward with a proposal, and this is what we're hoping, to actually develop outreach in our parishes and communities that at the present moment don't serve or are being served by the leisure centres, and we're hoping to bring that forward in the future. Chris, would you like to just come in?
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Yeah, I confirm that. So the contract we have with them provides them with one big tool, which is the leisure centres. And their contract surrounds that is all around ensuring they do the best by those leisure centres. And going back to 2016, that they invest in them significant amounts of money, they improve them, and then they operate them for us. So it's not surprising that when we talk about participation in sport, we're talking about participation in sport through those leisure centres. Now, there are other mechanisms to support wider uptake. And in the past, this council has funded things like the Devon Youth Games, which is a very powerful and successful way of doing just that. But more recently, it decided the members' decision was to not fund that particular activity. So there are ways in which we can do this, and if members are keen to see that supported, then of course the officers can help with a solution. But we shouldn't conflate it with what Fusion are being asked to do, which is quite well defined in terms of ensuring that they reach out into those, particularly around the harder to reach communities, in terms of the ones that need the most support and maybe have the biggest challenges with health and well-being. There's a clear direct link between, your standard of living and your standard of health. So it is about reaching to those communities, but through the tools they have, and those tools are the leisure centre. So I think that's where this has got confused. I hope that helps.
Mr. Parkinson, would you like to seek to answer the question?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris, for your points there. Yes, and I do take Councillor Spencer's sort of question there, and I know, yes, because previously there has been an element of, what can Fusion do elsewhere in the communities, but obviously, very much the focus on increasing activity and usage in the leisure centres, but also making people aware in surrounding communities as to what is available in our centres. I mean, the standard sort of Sport England scenario of placemaking for drive time is that these centres have a 20 to 30 minute drive time for usage. So it effectively covers most of our district. But on a specific point, Fusion are within their reporting do have a sports and activity development plan to update us with, and some of the information provided in the presentation, for instance, on leisure youth nights and exercise referrals, are part of that plan. Part of that plan as well includes increasing usage in target groups, particularly people that are not involved in sports activity as they can be, and there's barriers to participation. So there's a role for Fusion to try and break down those and make it easier and accessible for people to engage in activities. I think there's an element that, we can work with Fusion to, particularly, and it's been mentioned, working in targeted areas, particularly working with health inequalities. So if there are particular areas where we as a council have got data to work with and to do some extra work on, then we can partner in with Fusion. And what Fusion have, and I know with Claire Bill, the Strategic Development Manager, is the links and the partnerships they have with the CVS, with Active Devon, with national governing bodies of sport, and with other local community groups about, if there is a specific need in a community as to how Fusion could support that. That support may be in about trying to identify additional funding or resource to support that community. So I think it's a bit of a two-way process as well. If there are areas where we know we want to dedicate resource and focus, then we can engage with Fusion to see how that can be done in a partnership approach.
Thank you. Mr. Molyneux.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just really, and thank you, John. I just wanted to build on what Mr. Brooks said, really, because I think it's important in terms of context, in terms of this is year 5, or 2021 was year 5, but in reality, because of COVID, they're really only at year 3. And if you think about that original takeover of the leisure centres, invest in the leisure centres, that was sort of where we were before COVID hit. So where Fusion are at now is just getting back to that point. And I think, Councillor Spencer, your point is really valid, but I think, and if we'd have not had COVID, I think we could have really scrutinised Fusion in terms of those plans. But I think, bearing in mind what they've been through, what we've all been through, I think we're probably, a little bit behind. And as I'm sure as Mr. Luscombe will say in the next report, and Councillor Hawkins, some of the sort of health and well-being stuff takes time to build. You don't make sudden changes in terms of those sort of impacts. And I think, to be fair to Fusion, I think, they've lost 2 years of their plan. So that's all the context I would give it. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Spencer.
Yeah, just trying to produce a balanced view here, believe it or not. I did get an email from Claire Bill, who's previously mentioned as the Strategic Development Manager, as did Councillor Hopwood, who doesn't appear to be with us, or maybe, I don't know.
She's online.
And it talks about trying to make contact pre-COVID, which I have to say did not happen, but we'll leave that one aside. And she did, strangely enough, the email's dated the 10th in advance of today's meeting, strangely enough offered to make contact. On phoning her back, the response was, I'm out of the office for the foreseeable future. Now that is not terribly helpful, although the initial email was actually an indication, but I think that of their goodwill. But I think the impetus has got to come from them, because we don't know, as the rural community, what they've got to offer. We don't know what they do because we don't go there. And that impetus does need to come from them, I feel. And so whenever the foreseeable future has ended, I'd welcome an opportunity to pick up this dialogue. I did on the Monday visit, not this Monday, but last Monday to Ivy Bridge, ask Peter King whether there was any geographic data of usage. In other words, could they provide some evidence that people from individual wards, not postcodes, but towns, villages and so on, actually use the facilities, and they can't do that. They did say they would have a look, and I don't know whether John has any updated information, but I was hoping they'd have something to offer us here that actually does indicate that they do go further afield. So I just wanted to follow up on that.
Councillor Spencer, can I suggest that quite obviously Mr. Parkinson's picked up the question and your concerns, and I think it would be important that you relay the question, the concerns, and the issues arising out of what's been that's arisen to Mr. King at Fusion, and ask him that this issue is dealt by him at the next meeting, and because clearly there's an issue here that needs addressing. So I think that needs flagging up so that he's prepared to come up with some concrete answers to your questions.
Yep.
So would you like to move to the next question?
Yes, sorry about
No,
this.
that's okay, don't apologise.
Under 3.1, which is on page 12, it talks about specific performance indicators. Now, I don't know whether those performance indicators were going to be delivered during the presentation, but I'd be very keen to know what those performance indicators are and how Fusion measure up against the indicators that presumably they set, or maybe we set, I don't know. Could I get some sort of clarity on that particular point, please?
Mr. Parkinson, I think can you answer this, please?
Yes, I can give some feedback and background on that. The KPIs have been set in the contract, and we've alluded to some of them in the report here. Obviously, the most distinctive one and fundamental one is, increasing usage, getting people more active, obviously based around the leisure centres, promoting community cohesion, and then that's involving the target groups. So again, particular target groups, again, based on Sport England information about disability groups, young children, toddlers, women, older people. They are sort of target groups that need to reflect in the balance of programmes that the leisure centres have. So there's information we can provide on that as well. Wellbeing, so that infers to the exercise referral programmes, and again, increasing them, getting more people involved on the referrals, and having more contact with health partnerships in that respect. But also there's KPIs around the quality of service that is reflected. So the contract needs to have what's termed a Quest assessment. So that's the National Leisure Service Quality Badge, as it were. So it's an independent assessment of our leisure centres, which is done on a regular, if not annual, it's on 2 years, but there are 6 monthly reviews, and that includes customer visits, as it were, mystery customer visits. So Fusion are assessed onto, phone calls, finding out about activities from a mystery user and giving feedback and a scoring on that. And I'm pleased to say, obviously, within the report, I think Peter King had alluded to that all of the sites had a successful Quest review. So that's very much about an external validation of the leisure centres. And we also have KPIs around sustainability and environmental improvements. And obviously that relates to reduction of annual energy usage and CO2 emissions. So we do have KPIs against, several key outcomes.
So
thank you.
Following on from that then, I think it'd be helpful for members to have a complete list of all the specific performance, the KPIs, and not only the list, but also how Fusion are performing. I think you've touched on that some of them are mentioned in this report, but not all of them. And I think we have a duty as a committee to look at all of them. So can we please have that for the next meeting? Not just the indicators, but also the performances. That is possible. Mr. Councillor Spencer.
Yeah, I was going to say, before the next meeting, we've got a key vote to make on the 31st of March, and that information is pertinent to that meeting, in my view.
Mr. Molyneux.
I'm looking at Mr. Brooke.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. There's no problem publishing the list of KPIs. Yeah, we can circulate that by email after the meeting. Just have to find it from the contract, which I can't probably multitask enough to do right now.
So we will have then, before the full council meeting, a list of all the performance indicators in the Fusion contract and what the current state of play is. Is that a yes?
You can certainly have the list of the KPIs, and you'll have the information we have as to how they're performing against them, which is slightly different to committing to providing you the answer as to how they're performing against them, just because there may be reasons why that's not possible. I'm not aware of any, but I don't want to say to you, Chairman, something that I then can't deliver. But yes, that would be the aspiration.
Okay.
Okay. Sounds good, thank you.
Okay. Any more?
And thank you, John, for your explanation. I greatly appreciate it. Just moving on 4.2, which is also on page 12. The report says that compared to January 2020, the usage is 97%, getting very close to pre-COVID levels. And in 4.6, it talks about a completely different set of figures, which are over 6 months old. So I'm slightly confused, and could I have some clarity, please?
Mr. Parkinson.
Okay, sorry if there's confusion there then, Councillor Spence. So the point in 4.2, that refers to overall usage. So you've got the comparison of the 62,000 this January to pre-COVID levels. That would have been same time 2 years previous, 64,000. So that's where that 97% is attributed to. As to further figures down, they are specific to the membership usage. So that's very specific to people that have taken out a direct sort of monthly debit membership usage of the various sites. So that's where the figures there. The swim school, again, is very specific to swim school membership usage. So across overall usage, general leisure centre membership and swim school membership, you've sort of got three levels of percentage compared to sort of pre-COVID performance levels. So there's three key indicators in that range, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you, and I'll shut up now, at least on this one anyway.
Chairman, could I just bring your attention to, there was a conversation in the chat bar. Councillor Pearce asked whether all members could receive the KPI information, and Mr. Brooke committed to get that out to all members, not just members of this committee, ahead of the council meeting. But just want to make everyone aware.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Brooke. Thank you. Can we pick up the point then that was made by Councillor Jackson, which is touched on at 4.4 of the report on page 14, that says, the attached presentation from Fusion highlights key performance areas and provides a look at key projects for the coming year in regards to solar energy across all centres and the Totnes Leisure Centre development. What is the position concerning that? Because whose responsibility is it to carry out the installation? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Fusion's contract extends to maintenance as opposed to, and presumably, what happens if there are additional works carried out? What is the procedure and what is the position with the solar energy project? Yeah, I'm looking at Mr. Parkinson, or I was going to look at. So, Mr. Brooke or Mr. Parkinson, who's going to answer it? Mr. Brooke, you're a senior, right?
Just forgive. John did the last one, didn't he? So I'll do this one. There's in truth, there's multiple ways it can be done. So we lease the whole building to Fusion, so it's theirs. And if they wanted to make a material change to the structure of the building, Then under the lease, they have the power to ask, and we have to give consent. Well, consent would not be unreasonably withheld, I think would probably be the wording in the contract. So in the context of solar panels, of course, we would actively want to encourage, as indeed it has been the case. There will be a report on this coming to the Executive and Council with a proposal to facilitate it. Not wanting to sort of prejudge that report, but the broad principles are one of a partnership approach. So yes, there will need to be, a process gone through with regard to the lease, but in reality, it's about using everyone's best skills. So Fusion will be the delivery partner, so they will work with the supply chain to put them on. They will receive funding for it, or they could receive funding for it from this council if the council is minded to approve it. They will pay that back at a rate of interest, so the council will get value for money. It'll see its assets improved. If we were operating them directly, we would just be buying them and putting them on ourselves. So this is quite close to that as an approach. And Fusion benefit as well because their cash flow is improved by virtue of some resilience around energy prices, as was brought up earlier in the meeting, which I would absolutely agree on that point. Energy vulnerability for all sectors, especially the leisure centre, is a concern. So it's a positive partnership. That's the approach we are hoping we can get approval for.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I was wanting to ask a question around this area because the presentation talks about the solar panels, but I'd like to ask about has Fusion or the council given any consideration to a bigger project? I mean, these leisure centres are huge consumers of energy, and I imagine the operational costs is a significant part of the operational costs. Combined heat and power, from what I understand, when employed in leisure centres, can significantly reduce the energy costs and energy consumption by sort of 35–40%. I've read in certain certain circumstances, and then there are other. My attention was drawn to this by somebody else, and so I looked into it. And there are other aspects of intelligent ventilation systems, etc., which can also significantly reduce your energy costs. And given sort of the financial climate and the climate crisis, it would seem that this sort of thing is something that we should be looking at. But there's no mention of this sort of thing in the report. So, is it? Do you know if there is any consideration being given to this?
Councillor Mackay, is actually on page 30 of the
combined heat and power.
It's got the carbon reduction measures. That is.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm talking specifically about combined heat and power projects and intelligent management projects and all these other things that can be brought to bear.
Is that Mr. Brook or Mr. Parkinson? Mr. Brook.
Thank you, Chairman. So it's a journey, I would say, and I absolutely endorse the aspiration and ambition that this council has to reduce its carbon footprint, and through that, the supply chain, which is a scope 3 emission in our context, which we measure actively. There's a requirement in the contracts, in fact, for Fusion to be seeking to reduce their carbon footprint. We built that in 2016. So the journey has started, but the next big step in this journey is the solar panels, which is why it's pertinent to this slide deck and would have been brought up at this meeting. The journey continues, which is then how are we going to work with Fusion to assess their buildings. And going back to Mr. Mulleney's point, for 2 years they have been trying to exist and ensure that they survive to ensure they can deliver a really good service to the communities. They've not been looking at their building. Energy prices were through the floor and nobody was using them anyway, so it wasn't an issue. Now, that's not to say that it is not a really high priority for us and them. It is, and that's why the solar panels is now coming forward. So in due course and as quickly as is possible, I absolutely will be bringing back, with the support of Fusion, further proposals. If nothing else, until you have done the design work and feasibility studies, you can't take advantage of government funding for these things. So it's in everybody's interest to answer these questions and to do so in a reasonably and prompt time frame. So yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask Councillor Rose? Then I'll come back to you, Mr. Parkinson. Councillor Rose, you had a question.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to ask about the situation with Tressoc, Totnes Renewable Energy Society, just because there's quite a kind of long, slightly embarrassing history with them of them being ready to put solar panels on our leisure centre in Totnes for years, and literally kind of just waiting for us to say yes, and then that not happening. And I'm just wondering where we're at with that, if there's any possibility of finally kind of moving forward with them. And I'm aware that, Chris, you just mentioned talking about, us buying panels and putting them on roofs, which I would imagine as Tressoc, will obviously be selling us the power. There would be a financial implication of that. However, I would argue that the financial implication of that against the sort of social/community capital implication of supporting a local sustainable energy group would outweigh a slight financial benefit to the council. So just like an update on that, please. Thank you.
Mr. Parkinson or Mr. Brook? Mr. Parkinson, would you like to answer that question, please?
Yes, I can only add that there has been dialogue, and I've been involved as well of a joint meeting with one of the Tressoc directors, with our head of assets, with Stuart Truss, our lead facilities, and with Fusion. So we've had a sort of a group meeting on that basis. And I know, yes, Tressoc were very much interested in a wider community heating scheme or energy scheme being shared across, other community groups and users, local households as well. But at this point, we were specifically just dealing with installation and saving of energy through a solar panel installation scheme. So that conversation has been had, but we are where we are with the proposal. The proposal that will come forward to full council next month or in the next 2 months. So, but as you say, Tressoc have definitely been involved in this discussion for this proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
So just to clarify, Tressoc aren't going to be providing the solar panels on the roofs, and if possible, could you answer why it is that we've decided not to use their solar panels? Thank you.
I think they've been offered that.
Mr. Brook.
So it was a decision. So ultimately, this, as I mentioned before, we're working in partnership with Fusion, so they are going to be delivering with the supply chain. So it's right that it's their choice. And to be honest, Tressoc's model works because they take value out of it. That's the whole point. So they provide the finance and they make money off the back of it, and that's commendable, because in certain situations there are buildings whose owners are not able to finance the delivery of the obvious solutions around renewables like solar. So in that context, the Tressoc's offer is very attractive. But that offer doesn't apply here. So there's finances in abundance through the council. What we are trying to do is ensure the absolute best value in terms of public money and the best reduction in carbon footprint. And unfortunately, Tressoc's offer doesn't make that. And so it was considered, but it wasn't on for those parameters. It doesn't meet it's not the best option on the table. So I suppose it's disappointing from a Tressoc's perspective, but why are we doing this? Are we doing it to support Tressoc, or are we doing it for the right reasons, which is around our Scope 3 emissions and ensuring best use of public money? And unfortunately, for those reasons, we weren't able to proceed with Tressoc.
Thank you. Just 1 second, Councillor Rose. Mr. Parkinson, I think this part of Fusion's report we need further information, further details. So can you please ask them that this is an issue that we wish to discuss in more detail with them at the meeting, at the next meeting. So if you could make a note of that and inform Fusion, please.
Indeed, although the point, there will be a full report coming to council regarding.
I'm not just talking about Totnes, I'm talking about all the leisure centres on this issue.
Yeah.
Yes. Councillor Rose.
I just wish to say for the record that I take offence at the assumption that the council's financial position is more important than supporting community initiatives that are actually making huge differences other than just the council's finance. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Right. Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you. I'd just like to know, I haven't really seen it. We mentioned outreach earlier, and obviously times are going to be getting very hard for a lot of people very soon. I'm just wondering what we are doing with regards to Fusion in terms of low-income people, those on benefits, so that their access to our leisure centres is not compromised. I haven't really seen anything about that. I don't know what we have in terms of special payments, for reduced payments for people, and whether that exists and whether that will be looked at in light of the times that are to come in the next, without sounding too doomy, the times that are to come, which are going to be hard this year.
Mr. Parkinson.
Yes, I think in the presentation there was a point, obviously assisting with Fusion's business recovery. For the first time, there's been a fundamental review of prices and membership prices. And yes, and in taking account all the various pressures on household incomes, unfortunately, Fusion have had to, in discussion with ourselves, look and have implemented from last month, 1st of February, price increases across various bands of their membership. But in our discussions, it was very much on those points you've raised, Councillor Callaghan, that there are concession prices and there are very much reduced prices for people on low incomes, people that can't afford the higher end. And in fact, we've increased the range of some of those concession, or rather Fusion have increased the range of some of those concession prices, and particularly holding junior prices and introducing further junior prices. So yes, there's been a price increase, but yes, as well, consideration to having cheaper price options and concession prices. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Snowden.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of questions. One for Mr. Brooke and the other is more of a general one. So, Mr. Brooke, under item 2.6, it relates to the fact that Fusion received from the Council its share of the National Leisure Recovery Fund, £160,000 last March. Could you explain about the national, what exactly that is? And also, could you explain, did Fusion as a company not qualify for any of the other grants, which the business support grants and recovery grants, etc.? I mean, there were at one time there was quite a bewildering amount of support grants coming through. Did they not qualify for any others of those? Thanks.
Well, through you, Chair, thank you. So that was, it took a lot of lobbying to get that national fund in place, and lots of Sport England and were really at the coalface to make sure it was delivered. So it was the fund that made the difference between being able to say, if you operated leisure centres directly as an authority, they were able to benefit from basically COVID support grants, or at least you were able to claim COVID losses as a council. And if you operated them out through a contract, as we and a lot of other authorities do, you weren't able to do that. They also weren't able to access a lot of the business grant funding due to their scale and due to essentially because there's a lot of them are national players. They would ended up being sort of caught by other regulations around state aid. So they were very, very limited and in fact, virtually no ways in which they could receive funding. So as a result of that, they set up the National Fund. We had to apply jointly with Fusion. I came through the authorities, but obviously Fusion helped us put together the information. And somebody in Whitehall basically devised the scheme and did some maths, and they took the amount of money they were politically prepared to spend and divided it back down by the number of leisure centres, essentially. So it was it wasn't a question of bidding for it. It was more of a question of just giving them the information they needed to prove that we exist, and then they gave us the money. The sum of money was an aggregate of multiples of the leisure centres. So it was an amount per leisure centre. So we passported that money from government through us onto Fusion. So that's essentially how they accessed it. And I probably touched on the other bit, but basically they weren't able to access funding through in the same way that lots of other businesses were. So it was really lucky that the government did realise how vulnerable these leisure centres were and how many people were affected. Thank you.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. The other question is just more of a general one about Tadpole. I mean, I used to go to the Tadpole meeting, several years ago. Have we got a representative on, who goes to the Tadpole meetings, or do the local members go to Tadpole meetings? How do we?
We're not invited. Can I answer that, and also at the same time put a question to Mr. Brooke on the Totnes Centre? As far as my understanding is that this council took a decision 2 or 3 years ago not to send a representative to the Tadpole committee meetings. Mr. Brooke, I think, can you confirm that that's correct? Or Mr. Parkinson, I think that was the case. A decision was taken not to send a representative from this council.
I can confirm it,
Yeah,
Chairman, because
yeah.
it was me.
Right, okay. The position is, I had a meeting on Monday with, this is a question to Mr. Brooke, I had a meeting with Mr. King on Monday, and one of the topics we discussed was the situation at Totnes. And as has been explained to members, there is a strange relationship, and to try and as a result of what I would classify as a disjointed relationship, the improvements that are much needed in Totnes are just stagnating. And that is the issue raised by Councillor Rose is just an example of where very little is happening. And the problem is this, is that, I mean, this disjointed relationship nearly resulted in the leisure centre closing 2 or 3 years ago. And Fusion have got plans and proposals for improving Totnes, including dealing with the issues raised by Councillor Rose. And it seems to me what is needed, this is a question that I welcome your answer, Mr. Brooke, is that, and this has the agreement of Mr. King, is that there is a need for a working group to progress the much needed improvement works required at the Totnes Leisure Centre. And what it was proposed is that the group consist of the 3 local ward members, the lead executive member, and 1 representative from Fusion and Tadpole. And the purpose of that, the sole purpose of this working group is to ensure that the much needed improvement works that are required at Totnes are progressed. Would you give that your support, Mr. Brooke?
Of course, if that was, I think it's incumbent on the proposer of the change, which ultimately will be Fusion, and the arbiter of whether that change is good will be the council, because it's the council's £1.5 million that's on the table. And the more heads that support that process, the better, the more likely of a good outcome, I would argue. So that sounds like a very constructive proposal. And I think if there's going to be a representative from Tadpole there, and it'd be very appropriate that someone like such as John or myself are able to attend. And Councillor Hawkins, you may also want to be involved as the portfolio or the executive lead, but I don't wish to comment on the politics of it.
Yeah. Councillor Hawkins, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Chairman, I'd be happy to attend such meetings, but I wouldn't want to have meetings for years on end.
No.
I would actually want, like you do as Totnes members, action, and I'd want agreement as fast as possible, because that money is there. It can be developed and spent on the leisure centre. That's what we want to do. That's what you want to do. But I wouldn't want to spend months and months and months just going over nitpicking, because we've got to get this leisure centre up and running, as the other 3 leisure centres have had their investment in the last few years.
Thank you. So arising out of the answer to that question, I wonder if members would mind if I slip in a proposal, and the proposal is this, that the executive is requested to set up a working group to progress the much needed improvement works required at the Totnes Leisure Centre. The group to consist of the 3 local ward members, the lead executive member, and 1 representative each from Fusion and Tadpole. The meetings to be held once every 3 months and report back to the executive. I'd like to put that forward as a proposal. Do I have a seconder for that?
Yes, I'll second it.
Yes. Would anybody like to speak, comment? No? No, in that case, Councillor Rose.
The question of what is the time frame that we would like to be working at towards getting these improvements up and running? Because a quarterly meeting would indicate that that's going to be quite a slow. Sorry. To summarise what I just said without having the microphone on, I was simply asking what is the time frame that we're looking at to make these improvements, because a quarterly meeting would indicate that we're looking at quite a long time frame. Thank you.
Well, I would suggest that that's the first duty of that working group, is to set a time period for bringing the works to fruition. Councillor Rose.
So then I would propose the amendment that the first meeting is a kind of standalone meeting, and as a result of that meeting we set the time frame for further meetings. Thank you.
So what you're, well, in that case, that the first meeting of the working group be held within 4 weeks of the executive decision. Yes.
And at that meeting it's discussed how
I don't
regularly
think you need
we
to
want
do
to.
that. I just think you need to. That's something that's up to the working group. I think if you're setting the date for the first meeting, the working group can then decide what happens after that. Because after all, you'd be on it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So to add to I'll just read it again then. So the executive is requested to set up a working group to progress the much needed improvement works required at the Totnes Leisure Centre. The group to consist of the 3 local members, the lead executive member, and 1 representative each from Fusion and Tadpole. The meeting to be held once every 3 months and report back to the executive. Full stop. The first meeting to take place 1 month after the executive decision. So if I could put that to the vote, all those in favour?
Mr. Chair, can I just break in? You haven't actually said a representative of the officers.
I think that goes without saying. I don't think the officers. Okay. Yeah, I think that goes without saying that the officers would attend. I don't think they need to be official representatives. That's Mr. Molyneux.
Can I just clarify then? Are you asking the executives to set up the group, or do you propose that ONS sets up a group that reports back to the executive?
I much prefer it to be the ONS report back to the executive. But I don't want to be criticised for this committee overstepping its mark. So I will take advice from that, advice as to whether or not this committee has the powers to set up a working group to report back to the executive.
Lord Chairman,
I would like to overstep our mark.
All 3 of the local members are actually members of this committee, aren't
yeah.
Members of this panel. So I don't know. I would, if it were done under the auspices of ONS.
I think I'd keep it under the auspices of ONS.
Right.
We've got the executive member on that working group anyway. Oh, Darryl White's actually put his hand up, so he may wish to give us some advice, constitutional advice.
Thanks, Mr. Molyneux. Thanks, members. There's 2 elements to it. We can either the ONS committee can establish a task and finish group with a clearly obviously defined task and finish, or it can make a recommendation to the executive, which I think was the chair's original proposition, to set up in effect a working group of the executive. So, excuse me, there's 2 elements to this. Either it's to wish the meeting to set up a task and finish group within the auspices of ONS, or actually it refers it up to executive by way of a recommendation to set up a working group. Thank you.
Yeah. In that case, I think it has to be a working group approved by the executive, because with a task and finish group, you have to give a finish date, and that is unknown at the moment. So I think that answers that question. Right, okay. So I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we're still on questions. Are there any other questions? Councillor Spencer, you're coming for a second round.
Yeah, I lied. I'm coming back. Sorry. John just a while ago mentioned about price increases, and no one likes price increases. I would just like to clarify Fusion's position on this, because my understanding is that they are fixed prices that are not going to be reviewed for perhaps up to 12 months. Now, with the bank rate change today, oil prices going up minutely, if there is such a word, or certainly daily, and issues relating to wars and so on, cost of food increasing and the like, is that actually a wise decision to fix a price for 12 months?
Who can advise on the contractual position concerning pricing? Mr. Parkinson.
Yes, and I think we had an informal discussion with Councillor Spencer when we met with Peter King over at Ivorish, and I think that was raised about, yes, we have just increased prices, rather Fusion, obviously with our discussion with them from the 1st of February, and that was going to get looked on an annual basis, so, at the end of the year for 1st of April change again. I think that is what was suggested and confirmed by Peter King, that there wouldn't be any further review. And I think, in essence, it's about trying to get more people through using the centre to generate greater income, greater footfall. But ultimately, I guess you never say never, but I think it's very much the intention that there is no further increase in prices. Contractually, it is at Fusion's, they are in total control of prices. They're in total control of what price increases there are. Obviously, they're mindful in the partnership we have to consult with us, and so we can give our feedback accordingly. But I think there has been a fundamental review now, which, if there are any further increases next year, will be at a much smaller level on an inflationary rate basis. But I hear what Councillor Spencer says, as I say, with everything else going up and further costs mounting on Fusion, but within their business plan, they have, this annual review, and at the moment it's set for, prices being agreed now.
So is this a matter, I think, that perhaps we ought to explore further with Fusion at the meeting next week? Sorry, next month.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what sort of business strategy that is. But
that was the point I was about to make, actually, that not wishing to quash democracy, but this was a report where Fusion were going to present, and we've spent an hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
And I think that question is a perfect question to ask Fusion when they present next month.
Right.
I realise that, yeah.
You'll get you. I'm sure you.
Right. Is any member desperate to ask another question? We've been on this now for an hour and a quarter. So, shall we? There have been 4 areas where we've asked Fusion to come back with answers, further information, etc. That is activities in the surrounding rural areas, KPIs, and carbon reduction / solar energy projects, and now pricing. So, Mr. Parkinson, have you got a note of those so that you can relay that to Fusion so that they're prepared for the next meeting, for our next meeting? That being the case, I'm reluctant to say that we note the report, because we're not noting it. I think we will adjourn this until the next meeting. I think adjourn is probably the right word.
Yeah,
yes.
Sounds good.
Yes. Do we all agree that this the hearing of this report be adjourned until the next meeting? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Chairman, can I just bring the text? It says the telly's about to turn off.
Idle TV power off.
Both of them. It says press a button to keep it on. That's brought up another lot. That's brought up another lot.
That'll go.
That'll go. Okay, right. Can we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is Better Lives for All, thematic update, community wellbeing. Councillor Hawkins, it's your turn again.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been fiddling around with my cursor so I don't get cut off during the last debate. Thank you very much. You've got the report from Ian Luscombe in front of you. Ian, I understand, is in the room. This is my introduction to help the debate. The well-being of our residents and communities goes through all our council's priorities and policies. And the well-being of our residents is one of the reasons why we all became councillors in the first place. We care passionately about our communities and our residents, and that's why we're all councillors. Enhancing our community well-being is essential to ensure all residents, young, old, alike, feel safe, well and secure in their environments. By working and listening to our fellow stakeholders and partners, we can ensure our resources are used effectively to help make future decisions. This update report sets out the progress that this council has made in achieving the key actions set out in 2021-22 thematic delivery plan. And I'm pleased that progress has already been made across this area. As we emerge from COVID-19, our focus is on continuing to help our communities recover. And as you will know, recently, Southampton District Council contributed over £50,000 to community voluntary groups to help just that. By building and developing partnerships, which is very important, we have made over many years, and more recently, from what COVID has created. We can do much by creating and strengthening those partnerships. As we all know, and as we've already debated, we are in challenging times, and I want this council to be at the forefront of supporting our residents. Providing opportunities and assisting our voluntary sector is at the very heart of our district and our communities. Our leisure centres and open spaces are essential to health and well-being of our residents. Working with Devon County Council and the NHS in partnership with others, we can understand the challenges that our communities face and develop a plan for those in rural poverty. This is the first performance report aligned to the community wellbeing element of our Better Lives for Better Lives strategy. Part of that strategy will be bringing forward in the weeks and months ahead a key part of that, which will be a rural poverty study, which is taking place and being based on at the present moment. It is very important that we all work together and do all we possibly can to support our communities and our residents. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Before I ask Mr. Luscombe to say a few words, I would like to suggest that there are 6 areas within the report, 6 actions as such. Would members prefer to go through it one by one rather than cover it all in one go? In other words, we could go through action 1, ask questions, any comments on that, and then we move on to the second one. I think that would mean that the discussion would become more focused rather than jumping all over the place. So are members happy to proceed on that basis? That being the case, perhaps item number 1, which is work with partners to pilot new approaches to tackling rural poverty in an area identified as in the most deprived areas of Southampton. Mr. Luscombe, do you want to address that? And then perhaps if Councillor Hawkins wants to add to it, then so be it. Yes.
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon, members. I was going to bring attention to this action specifically, in that it's the only action in the report that is classified at the moment as amber, which is off track but a plan in place, as opposed to on track, which would be green. The reason for that is, in some ways, that this item of work has been really successful in the initial stages, in that we sought to engage with a number of partners, which includes Devon County Council, the NHS, the voluntary sector, the police, to name a few. And what's happened is that we've found that there is a real traction and real interest with other statutory partners looking at doing the same piece of work, recognising that a post-COVID world has led to a number of exacerbated health inequalities. So much of my work now is being to partner in with other like-minded individuals in these organisations and make sure that we don't fall into the trap of replicating what others are already doing or intending to do, and instead that we put on a united approach to dealing with the issues around rural poverty. So there are ongoing discussions taking place, and before that scope of the plan can be finally agreed and brought before members, I felt that it was prudent to make sure that we took on the views of those partners and also of the voluntary agencies and partnerships which are already present within our communities and doing so much good work. So I think one thing that our early discussions with the voluntary sector has told us is that communities really want to be listened to, and it's really important that we get the views of the communities before we embark on trying to fix whatever problems we imagine that they have. And it is going to be really important to engage with those communities, which will involve engagement with district councillors, county councillors, local town and parish councillors as well, and the people in the communities themselves to really understand where the issues are in those communities and also what's going right in those communities as well, so that we could build on it. And finally, I would say, Councillor Hawkins talked about the grant money that we've been able to start to distribute. It's really enlightening, some of the applications that we got and some of the things that communities are putting on themselves and want support with from us to actually reduce some of these health inequalities and rural poverty. And I think we can do a lot of learning between individual communities and pass that expertise on once we position ourselves within those communities themselves with some of the services that we can offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any questions? Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Luscombe. On 1.1, could you give us an idea of, I mean, I've read this paragraph quite a few times. Can you give us an idea of what manifest outreach activities we might see? Because I fully appreciate we're at early stages, but it's difficult to get a clear idea of what this looks like at this stage.
I agree. It is difficult to see where this might go. Speaking to colleagues in Devon County Council Public Health, particularly, who have got expertise in working with communities in a public health setting, their view is that as a council we should be bold and that we should go and speak to the communities and find out what it is that they really want, what is really important to them. Because if we can do that and engage with the community and get active support from people within that community themselves, local community leaders, that's the way to making sure that whatever support that they need is sustainable. This is a pilot project that we're going to want to replicate in other areas of the district. And I think it's important as such that it is sustainable, that we can drop in, that we can give advice, we can support such structures and set up systems that aren't there already. But importantly, at some point we can break away from it slightly and look to other communities that we can help as well. We need to make sure that it is sustainable. So there isn't a list of things that we're going to do as yet. The list of things I'm going to do is quite short, and it's make sure that we're not stepping on the toes of other organisations, that we partner with them rather than duplicate, and make sure that we get to communities which really need our help, which is the point of looking at the public health data which is available and really analysing that to make sure we get to the right areas, and then just simply listen to what they have to say and form our approach from there. Thank you.
Any other? Councillor Spencer.
Thank you. I agree with everything that's in this section, but it seems to me that the one thing that might be missing is engagement with board members who could probably help you achieve your objectives. So could I ask that some sort of provision be made for engaging with board members at the earliest possible opportunity and get their expertise of being on the ground to help support your objectives?
Mr. Luscombe, do you want to respond to that?
Can you clarify what board do you mean?
Ward,
sorry,
ward
I
member,
misheard you.
not board.
Yes, yes,
Ward.
by all means, yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very pleased to hear that you're hearing your communities, because that's what I think is really important. It sounds terribly ambitious to me because there's so many things to do, and I kind of it's kind of quite a vague sort of brief, but it's also massively ambitious. And I just wondered if there was anything you were going to sort of focus on, because I know, and every ward's got different issues, but a lot of them are around housing, job opportunities, and public transport. So, are they the kind of things that you'd be looking at?
Thank you. There are. It can be a huge scope, and just scratching the surface makes you realise how huge this topic area is. We use a number of, there are lots of different health indicators which are available. My personal and professional view is that some of the most important are around income deprivation and particularly affecting people with children. So children who are affected and effectively living within poverty, to me, is a very important factor. There are other things, as you mentioned, around housing and services, which fits in with our housing crisis, which I think are important in terms of barriers to people accessing those services. There's things around employment, education, skills, training, and also I'm hearing from the Fusion report there's concern around physical activity, which again is another indicator in rural areas of people not having any physical activity at all. And certainly listening to Mr. Parkinson's talking about the Fusion contract, where we can demonstrate that there is levels of health inequality that we could perhaps bring in Fusion's expertise as part of this project, is really a good, exciting opportunity for us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think you've got a massive task, and I'm not sure at all how achievable it is, really. So that's just my thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins, you've got your hand up, or your virtual hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to comment. It is ambitious. It's a daunting subject, but that's one of the reasons why we're doing it. And I've got full support and confidence in Ian and his team to actually achieve the best results. He's working very closely with Team Devon and all the other district councils in Devon, which is so important, because then we can learn from them and we can actually strengthen the policies which we're going to bring forward to. It is important that we listen to our communities. That's the most important thing. But we as district councillors, and some of us are county councillors, and parish and town councillors, we can all listen and we can all feed back into this process. During the unprecedented, we've heard it so many times with COVID, but now with the Ukraine war, these unprecedented times we've got, our residents are going to go through an awful lot of problems and difficulties, and we need to be there to help and support them wherever we can. It is huge, but we're going to do our best on this, and I know Ian will work very hard for all of us.
Thank you. Mr. Monaghan.
Thank you. I've been listening to the comments and questions from councillors, and I think they're all really pertinent. And I think it does highlight the challenge. And Councillor Jackson, what you were saying, and that whole range of things. I think what this talks about is a pilot, and clearly we'll find an area, and we won't be able to fix all those things. It's about having a framework in place for partnership working to fix what's the most important issue in a particular community. And if we focus on a community and fix the most important issue in that area, then it's a framework where we can work with partners, and it'd be a different issue and different partners in other communities. And it's still a massive task just to do that. But I think we have to start somewhere. And we are key. And as you said, Councillor Spencer, involving the ward members, we are the local intelligence that in some ways some of the other partners have not got that level of detail. So it is about us working with them and bringing them together. But I mean, Ian and I talked about whether this should be amber or not, and we underlined because the scale is massive, as you all appreciate.
Can I just follow on the matter of amber? How is amber determined? Why isn't where is the measure to say that it should be amber, not green, or not should be red? I mean, it's it's a bit like a school report. This is the only one that's amber. The rest are all green. So how you got to it being amber?
Do you want me? Shall I answer
Well,
that?
no, Ian,
do you want to answer that?
I've got the coward's answer, and then I've got the right answer. I think the idea of this report is to give members confidence as to whether, as officers, we feel that we are on track to complete the task which is at hand. I think because of the scope of this one, and so the delivery plan itself was quite specific in terms of South Hams, and this project was to bring a report, a plan to members by, I believe it's the 1st of April, but it wasn't specific in what report, in what format members, whether it was a council, a committee or whatever. So I was going by the delivery plan in terms of the specifics that it was saying, but I think as well it's a bit of a gut feeling of the officers to say, look, we've got this, it's fine, it will be fine. And some of these projects lend themselves, like the Dartmouth Health Hub, is a schedule, is it on track? Other things like this, which are more of a moving feast, it's a bit of a gut feel, if I'm honest, to say to you, look, we've got this, but it's a huge task, as you've already identified in the discussion.
So if you come back to this committee, I think it's probably 6 to 9 months' time with the second report, what do you need to do to make it go green?
Can I come in on this point? So I think perhaps reflecting on the question, Councillor Birch, I think there's probably a bit missing, because one of the things the executive were clear in terms of the production of these measures was that they all had a time frame around them. And so what the red, amber, green signifies is green is it's on track for the time frame we've committed to. Amber is it's likely to be off track, but we are doing work on it. And red is we're not doing any work on it. So that's the rationale for this being amber. So I suspect in terms of when we come back with this report, it will still be amber because we will have missed the time frame that was originally published, but we are still actively working on it. And that's the difference between red, amber and green. Okay. So if that explains it, okay.
Sort of. Councillor Jackson, did you have another question? Okay. Right, members, any other questions on this? Councillor McCann.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, this is wonderful what's happening, and I wouldn't dream to criticise it in any way. I just wanted to ask about the process, because I am slightly bemused by the fact that we seem to be doing this as if it was a completely new project that nobody else has ever done. And I sort of feel that other councils must be addressing these problems in a similar way. And there are other, there are organisations out there that have been looking at this sort of issue for donkey's years and have loads of data. I mean, obviously, I would quote Citizens Advice as being one. I mean, they address the South Hams, and very specific to the South Hams, or at least the particular office in just around the corner here. They get phone calls on a daily basis, and they've got a whole range of information about where the issues are, the kind of issues, the locations of them, and etc. I mean, the data is from an organisation like that. It is just there to be had, I would have thought. I mean, I imagine the council, its own telephone answering services, got its own data, but I just am a bit confused. I mean, you make mention of the regional joint strategy. I had occasion to look at this not so long ago, and it's way out of date. It's ancient information. I mean, I take it you're not really using that in any serious way. I know that the census information is now available almost. You know, I really don't understand why it takes so long to emerge, but I take it you're using that as well. I'm just interested as to how this process is going to be developed, and how you're going to be working with organisations that really all probably know pretty much where the problems are and what needs to be done. We don't need to be sort of looking at this as if it was a blank sheet of paper, which is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I think
that's a question, right?
That's a question, yeah.
Okay.
In a roundabout sort of way.
Okay, thank you. I agree. A lot of this work has been done before. We've got really good examples in South Hams where there's a lot of community work looking at health inequalities, looking at supporting people. We've got a network of food banks, for example. We've got the Community Voluntary Service. We've got Citizens Advice. We've got Dartmouth Health Hub, which is a really good example of a community owned asset, which is looking at supporting people within that community. We've also identified a huge number of stakeholders, whether it's the statutory services, so the primary care networks, really big player in this, Devon County, really big player, and both of those organisations have got access to a huge amount of information. So it's not that the information is difficult to get, it's quite easy to access. It's making sense of it and then putting it into that, you know, rural context. That, you know, what the challenge for me is, given that there is support available in the areas that we know about, what about the areas that we don't know so much about? Why is it that we've still got areas of health inequalities which are quite stark in some places within the district, that all those people that we've both mentioned, all those organisations, can't have got to the heart to, because those levels are still quite high. So I think it's about understanding the provision. It's about understanding rurality and the impact that being rural has upon your ability to access those services, and going into those communities which the data tells us that there are still issues in, understanding what networks are in place and asking them what support they need to be more effective.
Thank you. I think Councillor Hawkins, you wanted to speak.
I think Ian has actually said all what I was going to say, but as all of us as councillors over the COVID period and the last couple of years, we've all seen how our communities have stood up and helped look after themselves to a certain extent. And the voluntary groups in all our communities and towns and parishes have been absolutely amazing. And we're going to work closely with the evidence which we've got from that. We're going to work closely with Team Devon, which is just what Councillor McKay has said. We don't want to do the same thing that Mid Devon has already worked on or North Devon has already worked on. And our officers already work closely with CBS and the CVS. And at the end of this, probably the most important thing we'll be able to do is that when somebody, and if we don't already know it, and hopefully we already know most of it, but we'll be able to signpost people quickly and efficiently to where those grants and help and assistance can be found. So that's one of the things I think that we'll be able to assess in the next 6 to 9 months.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Can I just make one suggestion about health inequality, that it would be good to look at the availability of NHS dentists in South Hams, because as far as I know there isn't any, and it's a big health inequality. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Right, and if there aren't any more questions, I suggest, as far as our committee's response to this part of the report, that would I be right in thinking that members welcome this initiative, but and picking up the point that was made by Councillor Spencer is that it's important that ward members are engaged in the process. Do we all agree that? Yeah. Councillor Rose.
I would also add something of what Councillor Jackson has mentioned, in that we are also noting that this is very ambitious. This isn't something that is like an easy win. And I feel like whilst we welcome it, we also note the ambitiousness of this task.
Yes. Are members happy with that? Right, I'd like to propose that from the chair. Do I have a seconder?
Yes.
Yeah. Does any member wish to say anything? Or shall we move to the vote? Move to the vote on this? Yes? All those in favour? Thank you very much. So if we could move on to item 2, which is the delivery of the Dartmouth Integrated Health Club. I nearly said club. Right, Mr. Councillor Hawkins or Mr. Luscombe, who's going to say a few words about this?
I'm going to leave it to Mr. Luscombe for the simple reason I've got a great interest in this, other than to say that the centre is on time scale, and it will greatly improve the health and well-being of the area for the Dartmouth and its surrounding parishes by bringing all the health facilities into one section. So it's an exciting project which we look forward to seeing completed.
Mr. Luscombe.
I haven't got anything else to add on that. I think Councillor Hawkins has summed it up.
Could you just remind members how much money the council is putting into this project? Or are you able to answer that question?
I think Mr. Brooke might be able to. Thank you.
Mr. Brooke, how much is the council putting into this project?
The capital approval is about, so don't hold me to this, to the nearest pound, 4.1 or 4.2 million, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Right. Questions from members? Or are we satisfied with the report and just note this part of the report? Councillor Mackay.
It's not a question, it's more of a comment, really. Do we have, well, no, it is a question. Do we have any measure of the impact of what I would regard as completely unnecessary development that's going on at Little Cotton Farm? Because there is a whole load of market houses that are going to require, that are going to be full of people that currently aren't there, and they will necessarily have an impact on this integrated health hub, which is there to serve the population of Dartmouth, but which is going to get considerably bigger. It's
Councillor Hawkins can answer that question as he's the local member.
I would completely disagree with Councillor Mackay. The Little Cotton development is vital to the sustainability of Dartmouth. We desperately need those new houses. Some not enough, but I went to the appeal to try and get more affordable social rented properties desperately needed in our town. And if we didn't have this development coming forward, we'll probably be unlikely to actually have this new health and wellbeing centre built.
Okay, I think that's a topic for another day, right? Yes. Councillor Jackson.
Just one question for Councillor Hawkins. Are you confident that you've got enough staff to service the hub when it opens?
Did you hear that, Councillor Hawkins?
I did hear that. I sincerely hope so. I mean, that's one of the issues that the Dartmouth Town Council are looking at, the possibility at the moment of building key workers accommodation down on the old hospital side.
Good luck.
Councillor Mackay.
So I take it that you won't be able to live in the affordable houses that they're being built at Little Cotton Farm.
Hold on, we're not going to go down that avenue. No,
yes,
no, that's not on the agenda. No. Right, any other questions? Right, okay, I suggest that as far as this is concerned, we just note the report, unless anybody wants to add to that. No? Okay, thank you. If we could then move on to the third item, which is support more people to live independently for as long as they choose through efficient delivery of housing-related grant schemes. Right, who's going to address this? Councillor Hawkins or Mr. Luscombe?
I'm happy just to say that I know our team works very, very hard, and Dave Sexton and his team provide greater help and assistance to our residents, and it's certainly he and his team are a good news story for this council.
Thank you. I see Mrs. Blake's here. Do you want to say a few words? No. Not yet. Not yet. Mr. Luscombe.
A question really for members. Would members find it helpful for us to produce, as part of this report, the information that goes into the capital monitoring report in that detail? Or would members prefer to see at future iterations of this some more qualitative stories about how really much of a difference some of these disabled facilities grants that we provide makes on people's lives?
Yes.
Because I feel that by bringing the financial information here, you've already had a chance to view that in the capital monitoring report. But this is an opportunity perhaps for us to share some good news stories with you.
Yes, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Yes, I think we all agree. Yes. Just as a question, it says here the council has a healthy budget as a result of good performance and astute negotiation. How much, so to back that up, what's the evidence to support that as far as this particular item is concerned?
Just finding the budget. So the amount of money allocated to South Hams for this financial year is 1,196,498. That's allocated by Devon County Council, who've got an obligation to pass on the government grant of the Better Care Fund, the portion that comes to local authorities for disabled facilities grants. The astute negotiations refers to the way that is divided up between I believe 9 different local authorities by Devon County Council, 8 different local authorities by Devon County Council, because in the past, good performance has meant that you get more of a slice of the cake. So what you have to do, and colleagues who've been in the position before me, started a really good trend of South Hams really performing well in terms of our spend, And what happens then is that the money which other local authorities might have been unable to spend then gets put into a pot and redistributed. So by doing well, by spending as much as we can, we attract a greater amount of grant in future years. So that's what that refers to.
Okay. So what is the level of administration involved in dealing with this, in administering this fund?
Do you mean what happens on a day-to-day basis?
So how many officers are involved?
So we've got myself, the level 4 officer oversees, Mr. Sexton oversees a group of case managers, 5 case managers, who aren't exclusively doing this work, but it becomes a lot of their working day. The role that they do is an administration role in terms of making sure the documentation is correct and doing lots of checks and balances against financial information for financial calculations for means testing. But also what the real benefit of what they do is that they talk to the customers, they understand the customer need, they understand the urgency and the impact that it has on the life of the customer, and they make sure that the builders, who are our other customers, who are contracted to do this work, do a really good job and do it as quickly and as fuss-free as that they can. And we've got lots of feedback which would be useful to share with members from customers who are just so happy with what's happened in terms of, you know, the facilities that they've got, what they couldn't do that they can now do as a result of having a level access shower, for example, and also saying how happy they are, how well we've managed that builder on their behalf, because there's contractual agreements involved, but essentially it's for us to make sure that the builder looks after that customer and they don't feel that they've been ripped off, which for a lot of older people who this relates to a lot of the time, their biggest concern is, you know, somebody coming into their house disrupting their routine, and then it's really helpful to them to have confidence in us to be able to manage those builders for them.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I just come in?
Yes, Councillor Hawkins.
Mr. Luscombe is slightly modest on his comments there about his success with these grants. Southampton Council fights well above its weight, and he's been very, very successful in the last few years to get these grants to actually help our residents. When I held this executive role many years ago, I was lucky enough to attend or visit a number of properties which had been given grants, and I'm hoping that Ian will be able to bring more forward for councillors to see, but they really are transformational. Some of them almost brings tears to the eyes because they've actually enabled families to stay in the homes that they want to live in, and it's a really good news story.
Thank you. Right, so members, are there any further questions or comments? No, in that case, could I say, rather than just note this, is that I think that the officers should be thanked for achieving a good performance in their together with their astute negotiations, and that we welcome examples of good practice to be included in future reports to this committee. Do we all agree on that?
So fine.
So can I just have I'll propose that from the chair. Second. Do we all agree? Yeah. Yes? Okay, hands up, please.
Yeah,
thank you.
Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Item 4, I really think we've probably done this to death, so I think we could probably move on to item 5, unless any member wishes to prolong the discussion on fusion.
Chairman, could I just make a point that at 4 o'clock there's an all-member briefing on free ports, and we've got about 5 minutes, so just...
Right,
yeah.
okay, well, that's I'm in the hands of the members.
Okay.
Steve is...
Wait.
I've asked Darryl if they would record it.
Okay, okay. Okay. Next item is the delivery of projects to enhance outdoor public spaces. Councillor Hawkins, Mr. Luscombe, who wants to say a few words about this?
I'll leave it to Mr. Luscombe.
I think the question, again, it's a question back, this being the first report of this nature, just to find out what members want in terms of information, whether the information which is put before them in the report, which I can't elaborate on at the moment. I'd have to look at supporting information, which I haven't included with the report. What level of information that members want of this? Again, I believe in the capital monitoring report, Lisa might be online to correct me, there are more details provided, and it seems pointless for me to come and replicate that information unless members have got a different view.
Well, perhaps I could follow that up with a question to you and to Councillor Hawkins, is that there are various figures mentioned in this report. The members were recently received a report on the state of 106 funds at the 31st of December 2021, and within that report there is a separate item for open spaces, sport and recreation. There are, within the council's, the council has 71 pots of 106 money, which totals just over £3 million. That's £3,016,285. And that isn't mentioned in the report. Mm-hmm. And in fact, what is being achieved by the report shows that really we're not taking advantage of the 106 monies that are available to this council for the projects. So I think, in my view, that is there's an omission there. That it's not. So my question to you is...
Could I comment?
Yes, I haven't finished the question yet, Councillor.
Sorry.
So the question is, what can we do to bring this forward? I have a proposal for bringing this forward, but I would welcome what your thoughts are on this. So first, shall I start with Councillor Hawkins and then go to Mr. Lusker?
Right. First of all, I don't think all of that money is allocated for open space and recreation. Some of it is, but not all of it. Councillors are, to the best of my knowledge, contacted by officers from Southampton Council and are regularly reminded of the pots of S106 funds in their areas. And to my knowledge, I know it certainly happens in my patch, we are able to help and assist where that money is spent. Can I suggest that, because the open spaces and particularly our play areas, again, in my view, are a really good news area, could I suggest perhaps you ask Rob Sekula to come to your committee meeting at some stage in the future?
Yes, what I was going to propose from the chair, just to in response to what you've mentioned, is a proposal, and I read it out. In respect of Action CW15, delivery of projects to enhance outdoor public spaces, that there be a report to the next meeting of this committee on a proposal on proposed measures to be taken to bring about a considerable reduction in the £3,016,285 of S106 monies in respect of the open space, sport and recreation report dated the 31st of December 2021. In other words, picking up the point that you've just mentioned, is that there'll be a report to the next meeting as to what measures can be taken to reduce this 3 million. And in answer to the point you made, the document that I have in my hand is the document that I'm referring to, and it was attached in a report dealing with 106 monies, and it specifically states open space, sports and recreation. So it is specifically identified as that. So I believe that Councillor Pearce wants to comment. Or Councillor Pearce?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I assume you can all hear me okay, but Councillor Hawkins has given you the correct answer. It is up to the local members to go back to their communities, and particularly their town or parish councils, and ask them how they would like this money to be spent. Because this money is there to compensate for the extra use on facilities occasioned by the development that produces the money in the first place. Now, some of the problem is historic, because for a long time, this council was collecting Section 106 monies and virtually not telling the local members where they were, what they were for, and when they had to be spent by. But it's not a secret now. This table is published regularly in the financial updates that come to the executive. And I think one was published the last meeting or the meeting before. But anyway, there is a full table there. So you can look down it and you can see how much there is to spend in your ward. Now, of these sums that have been allocated for the last 10 years or so, you've been allowed to use 5% of the money towards the administration of the project. Now, we have Alexis and we've got Rob Zakula on this case, and it would be difficult to justify more officer time. Alexis goes as fast as she can go, and if you have a project, Alexis will get it off the ground for you. She's very good at that. But I have to emphasise that a lot of this is up to the local members to move off the blocks. So I'm not sure how having a report is actually going to help you. Get your local members out there and get them asking questions and get them getting the money spent by their local communities, please. That's what it needs.
Thank you. Any other comments, members? Mr. Molyneux.
Just to sort of build on what Councillor Pearce said then, I think perhaps it's the what's reported, and I think because as Councillor Pearce said, there is a limited amount of officer resource here, and I think perhaps reporting against success of delivery of the projects in the pipeline might be the way to report this, because actually it's if there is a project that comes forward, are we actually delivering against it, as opposed to there is a pot of money with no project. So I would suggest that perhaps we just change the reporting slightly to reflect we've got 10 projects. Did we deliver those 10 projects in the last financial year? As opposed to we've got a pot of money, have we spent it all? That would be my suggestion in terms of perhaps just changing the emphasis of the reporting.
Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As far as I can see, that we are just holders of this money, and it's up to the parishes to come forward. We've just drawn down 210,000, I think, for some sports facilities in Mudbury. So all the parishes need to come forward with theirs. I mean, the money's going to stay there as long as, I mean, it's not up to South Hams to spend it. It's up to the parishes to claim it from the holders, which I believe is South Hams. Am I correct?
It's South Hams' responsibility to administer the fund. Yes. So, any other comments? So I still retain the proposal, because having been a councillor for a few years now, I've seen time after time reports of the large amounts of money that are just in 106 monies. I mean, the total of 106 monies is not just the 3 million for open spaces, but there's other elements as well, and it totals £6.5 million that is sitting there ready to be spent. And I think that it's by just saying, well, it's up to local members to take on the responsibility to do that. I think it needs more than that. I think it needs, local members need to be assisted by officers to make certain that this money is spent. All I'm proposing is that for the next meeting, this issue be addressed by the way of a proposal coming forward as to the best way that we can ensure that this money is spent rather than languishing in the council's reserves. So I'll read it out again. So my proposal is, in respect of action CW 1.5, there be a report to the next meeting of ONS on the proposed measures to be taken to bring about a considerable reduction in the Section 106 monies totalling £3,016,285 in respect of the Open Space, Sport and Recreation report dated the 31st of December 2021. So do I have a seconder for that proposal? Yes, Councillor Jackson. Right, does anybody wish to speak? No, in that case we'll move. Sorry, Councillor Spencer.
I'm trying to take on board what everybody said, and I understand what you're saying, and I think it's right. But isn't the solution, as Councillor Pearce has already said, for members to actually do something about it? Isn't that the solution? Do we need a report to tell us that that's the solution? If we can take this out and talk to our parishes and get them moving, then, to my mind, it's as simple as that. Or is it?
And perhaps can I answer that by saying I would suggest that by this time next year we have the same report. It's still going to be round about. It's going to be a high level. I think I don't have confidence in the fact that members alone are responsible for finding a home for this money. I think it needs to be more than that. I think we do play a part. We play an important part, but on our own is not sufficient in my view because it hasn't worked in the past, and that's part of my.
Sorry, Chair.
Councillor Smurden.
We're talking about discussing this at the next ONS. So would it be appropriate for the relevant officers to be part of that discussion so that we can, they can have their input as to how they feel we can best help them to. If we can ask them what we can do to assist them and how members can maybe press things forward in their wards, and then perhaps that would be the time to decide whether we need, to set up a group or do whatever. Can we maybe deal with it as an agenda item at the next meeting, and then ask the officers to attend, and then see what we need to do at that stage?
Yeah, but I think it would be helpful to have the officers' input prior. It doesn't have to be a lengthy report. It just needs to be their input, so that we can take that on board when we come to discuss it at the next meeting. So can we move to the vote then? So all those in favour, put their hands up please. All those against?
That's 4, I think. Oh, no, 5, sorry, I didn't see you.
And that's lost then, okay, right. Is there anything else on this item?
Well, I would say that I would think that it would be, you and I will discuss the agenda for the next meeting, won't we?
Well, perhaps I understand what you're getting at. In other words, do members wish to discuss this further at the next meeting, or yes?
Yes, I don't see any harm in.
Right. Yeah. So we all agree that this will be an agenda item at the next meeting, that we'll discuss it further. Yes, and it would be helpful for for officers to give some thought to this, and we welcome their input at the meeting. Yes. All those in favour?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, if we could now move on to.
Chair, can I just interrupt and say that the all-member briefing has been put back to 4:15, and coffee is also still available in the dining room. Right.
Okay, right. We've just got one more item then. Yes, item 1.6. Councillor Hawkins, Mr. Luscombe. No.
Ian, can you comment on that, please?
Sorry. Yes, I will do. Excuse me while my computer just comes back to life. Sorry. I think the question for me, the information is set out in front of you members. The question for me is, what would you like me to report on in this area? Because we've given out these grants. Now, to me, there's going to be some really good news stories. I've seen the sort of applications that we've had and the ones that we're minded to support. I think it's about how we then share that information with you as members, if you'd like me to do that through this report, and then what we as a council, how we want to play our role in those really good initiatives, being rolled out. So, what sort of involvement would members want if, for example, we've managed to fund a community football team, for example, in a certain area. So it's about being part of that community. For me, it's about we've been in the fortunate position to be able to distribute this money. There will be some real health benefits, I believe, and it's about how we as members want to position ourselves in the community in terms of those things going forward.
Okay. Members, would you welcome in the future reports good news stories, examples of where the initiative is working.
Yes.
And I think we'd like to perhaps add to that the point that I think there needs to be ward member involvement, as there was pointed out by Councillor Spencer at item number 1. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that being Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on that point, Ian and his team have actually sponsored, I think, an over 55 walking football team, which is all about well-being and everything else, and I thank Ian for that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Tom. How do we sign up?
I'm hoping to make the team, but I'm not old enough.
Okay.
Don't worry,
Okay.
there's plenty around.
Okay. Any questions? So can we take? Sorry, Councillor McCarthy.
Just a quick one. Is this a one-off initiative, or is this likely to get repeated?
The funding has been identified for this year, but I assume that it's in members' gifts to identify, you know, money in the budget that we could continue this in the future, depending on the, you know, the value that we feel that we're getting out of these activities.
Okay. Right, I'd like to propose from the chair then that we welcome the progress being made, and that we request examples of the benefits of the scheme, and that furthermore that there be a ward member involvement.
Happy, yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah. Do we all agree? Hands up, please. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think we've done that item. Yes, Councillor Spencer.
Can I mention one thing that straddles most, if not all, of these points? And that is that the strategy talks about one of its core values being they want prosperous communities, healthy lives, empowerment, and so on. And when the original document was issued, made a comment about it has to apply equally to rural environments as well as to urban. And I'd just like to cite one example where this has been totally neglected. And there was an email issued just before Christmas about a My Place campaign which supported preferred towns, Kingsbridge, Ivybridge. I don't wish to specifically mention anyone in particular, but there were 6 that were chosen, and funding from the European Regional Development Fund was used to support advertising campaigns and support mechanisms for these towns and events and things that were going on in the towns. Now, I actually was sad enough to read the documentation that supported the application to the Development Fund, and it specifically said in there that parish councils and more local communities should be contacted, and they weren't. So the funding went to the larger areas again, and I know this sounds a bit like a common theme, it's because it is. And I wrote to those people who talked about it, and they said, yeah, okay, we didn't do anything. And I pointed out that I felt that the selection process, such as it was divisive, and clearly creates an us and them position with the smaller communities. The response, and this was in November last year, and the response that came back was that the individuals had spoken to their colleagues, and yes, they will actually write out to parish councils, and that would happen imminently. And so I cite it as an example where Better Lives for All is not applying to the smaller communities in our district. And I would like that point to be specifically addressed in the future, such that the communities, the smaller communities, more rural communities, actually get a fair crack at what's going.
Thank you.
And that straddles most, if not all, of these points. Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins, Mr. Luscombe, can you respond? And Mr. Molyneux?
I think, I mean, because what Councillor Spencer said is wider than just the communities, but I think that, and that's the point that you're making. I mean, the specific theme here was really the economy type theme. I think it's a point that I think should be noted and passed back to the executive in terms of the strategy, that you know, there is concern that it applies equally across the district. I mean, the rural poverty pilot is likely to be a smaller community rather than a larger community. So, you know, I think, but I take your point, but I think that it applies across the whole of the strategy and that everyone should be equal. Councillor Hawkins wants
absolutely right, and I didn't mean to highlight this particular strategy, but it so happens that it applies to this strategy as well. Thank you.
So can that point be noted, and can it be referred to the executive?
I think you can put it as a note for the executive. Yeah.
Can that be included within the minutes? Yes. Are you happy with it to be included in the minutes?
Councillor Hawkins is yellow.
Councillor Hawkins.
I think we need to speak to Councillor Spence, and we need to do all we possibly can to raise his, understand his concerns, and do all we can to help him. So yes, that's very much in the case. I was just going to make one comment about the grants which we were lucky enough to be able to give this year. I'm sure Councillor Kpis is listening to this. Hopefully in the next year's budget she might be able to assist us with an equal sized fund for next year, which would be really good. That's tongue-in-cheek, Leader.
Right, okay, I don't think we'll take that any further at this stage. I think that's quite obviously, it needs to be a dialogue, yes? Councillor Spencer.
Yeah, sorry, and thank you for that, Councillor Hawkins, and I appreciate your thoughts. I didn't just mean me, I meant all ward councillors for rural communities, and that doesn't just apply to Bickley and Cornwood.
I totally understand that, because I'm a county councillor and I've got lots of very, very, very small parishes, and it's really important we serve them just as much as the towns. I understand that.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. If we could move on to item 9, which is the Task and Finish Group, the Affordable Rural Housing report. There is a recommendation on page 48. So I'll ask Councillor Smurden as chair of that Task and Finish Group to address this, please.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. I'll be brief, because it's effectively, you know, all displayed in the agenda, etc. I'd like to thank the 8 members, or the 7 members as well as myself, who put a considerable amount of time and effort into this, researching projects that other authorities had looked at. As you can see, that was our main brief, was to research how other local authorities have successfully increased the delivery of affordable housing. I think we probably all agree that it wasn't a necessarily easy task. It's quite difficult to, whilst there are loads and loads of examples of good practice, it's difficult to pin down things that will, you know, that would possibly necessarily work here. And we had, you know, we were fortunate that we had, you know, senior officers from the housing team who were working with us, and with discussion with those officers brought forward the comments that obviously, you know, there are still, you know, considerable difficulties finding sites. And that affects all communities, and it's also important to clarify the need in these particular areas as well. The thing which I would urge all members really is to engage with the housing team, and we've got an excellent team of officers in place with great knowledge who you know, who are able to work on and help members with these projects. Whilst we acted as a Task and Finish group, and there is an emphasis on finish, it's important to note that we have to keep the issue of housing provision front and centre, and it would be wrong to say that the work is finished, because it isn't. And we will, you know, I'm sure as members, we will keep this going. So the recommendations are there. Before everybody, you know, I don't think I need to go through them. I'm happy to propose them if
So the proposal is it needs amending at the top, and it is not the task and finish group recommend. It needs to be that the overview and scrutiny committee recommend to the executive, because we are making a recommendation to the executive. So Councillor Smurden, you're proposing that?
Yes, happy to propose that.
And I'll second that. Does any member wish to speak or ask a question? No. So can we move to the vote then, please? All those in favour?
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. So that takes us to the last item on the agenda, which is the committee work programme. A meeting on the 22nd of April, we need to add to that the adjourned fusion report. We also need to add to it the item that was referred, that's the 106 monies in respect of open spaces, etc. Can I also propose that we seek to bring forward the connecting Devon and Somerset? There is, I'm sure other members are having issues with airband, and I think the sooner, I think there is an opportunity, there will be an opportunity for us to meet with them, and the time, it seems appropriate that it's the 22nd of April, the meeting at the 22nd of April. So if members are happy to bring that forward, and hopefully Airband will attend together with representatives from Connect Devon and Somerset.
I was going to say it's Devon and Somerset. Airband is
Yes.
supplier certainly, but connecting Devon and Somerset is Devon County Council, and it's they are the people who need to be here.
Yes, that's why I'm saying I think it needs to be Connect. There needs to be Connect Devon and Somerset together with Airband, and also together with the South Hams officer, that's Gemma, who's also doing liaison. She needs to attend as well.
Chairman, can I just check? You're referring to the meeting as being on the 22nd, and I'm just looking here. It's on in our calendar. It says here that Thursday the 21st. Overview and scrutiny.
Well, it's on the report here. It's the 22nd. So that.
Yes, my apologies. That's my error on the minutes.
Well spotted by the Vice Chair.
even at this stage of the game.
So right, so what?
Could I just be clear then? So having voted down, bringing a report back on the Section 106 contributions, you've now asked for an item on the Section 106 contributions. So if it's not a report, what exactly is it?
It's a discussion. So all that needs to be report included in the papers is that document that I referred to. It sets out the Section 106 monies, the total £3 million. Okay. We don't require a report.
Thank you.
It was. I think we all agreed there would be a discussion with officer contribution, and that we invited officers to think about it before the meeting. I think that was the decision. Yeah. Councillor Mackay.
Make an observation. I mean, we've been here for 2.5 hours and we didn't have a particularly onerous agenda. The agenda for the 22nd of April now is going to be, I think it's going to take all day.
Well, perhaps we can. That's up.
Can I suggest that the chair and vice chair liaise with the officers to ensure that we have an agenda that is manageable and hopefully concluded within the shortest possible time? Yes. Well, you happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is that it?
We may decide that some things.
Yeah. Well, that's something. Yes. I'm going to conclude the meeting. Oh, sorry, Councillor Brazil.
Yes. Thank you. Just to say that very kindly put on the agenda that we have a report from the South West Ambulance Service. My understanding is that they have refused to communicate with South Wales. I wonder if we could send, if it would be possible to send in a very strongly worded letter saying that it's a pretty poor show.
Yes.
They're failing to turn up to a democratically elected body to explain why the ambulance service in the South West is the worst in the country.
Do we all agree?
Yeah.
Yes. No. No. Okay. Hold on. Right. There's a request here that the letter be sent to, well, can I just remind members, if you look under to be considered for scheduling, South West Ambulance Service, we did agree at that, I think it was our last meeting, that we would invite them to come to ONS. And they were requested to, letters have been sent to them, and they've not responded, so we've had no response at all. We're being requested by Councillor Brazil to send them a stiff letter or words to that effect along the lines that he mentioned. I would like to support what Councillor Brazil says. It's late in the day. I think rather than us have a debate about it, I mean, would members just wish to go to the vote on this? Councillor Thompson.
Chairman, can I just have a very quick point of clarity? How many letters have we sent?
I've done it twice.
So we've sent 2 letters.
Yeah.
Sorry, we just haven't answered or refused. I spoke to them the first time and then sent a letter at the request of the lass I spoke to. Got no response, so I sent it again, chasing it.
Okay. Right. I think it's either we do or we don't. So I'll put that to the. I like to propose that we do. Do I have a seconder for that? Yes. Right. All those in favour of sending the letter?
That's bar one.
You're voting against. You're abstaining. Okay. Thank you. Right. In that case, that concludes the meeting. So thank you very much.
Can I just say, Chairman, if before the letter is sent, maybe all members can see it prior to. Or...
Chair and vice chair.
No, I think just. I don't think. I think letter by committee is. I think it.
Right.
Councillor Hawkins has put into the chat box that he's happy to sign it.
Huh?
Councillor Hawkins is happy to be a signatory.
Okay, that's fine. Good. Yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Meeting closed. Thank you.